Judge sentences combat veteran to maximum prison term, then removes his robe and says 7 words that silence the room. Combat veteran faces 10 years for drug offense. Then judge reveals what no one knew about him. The courtroom was tense as Judge Robert Simmons delivered the harshest possible sentence to James Conner, a decorated but troubled Afghanistan veteran. As the gavel fell, everyone expected the judge to exit. Instead, he removed his judicial robe and revealed a combat uniform underneath. "Staff Sergeant Conner, I'm not just your judge today," he said quietly. The gallery froze in disbelief. The Riverside County Courthouse in California stood imposingly against the desert sky, its modern glass facade reflecting the harsh morning sun. Inside Courtroom 4, the air conditioning hummed steadily, a stark contrast to the emotional heat of the proceedings. The gallery was unusually full, veterans in various states of uniformed social workers and a cluster of stern-faced prosecutors. Armed bailiffs stood at attention, eyeing James Conner, who sat slumped at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his once powerful frame now gaunt, his eyes fixed on the floor. His court-appointed attorney shuffled papers nervously, having clearly given up on the case long before entering the courtroom. At 32, James Conner bore little resemblance to the proud Marine who had once led combat patrols through Helmand Province. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left him with the visible and invisible wounds of war, a slight limp from shrapnel in his left leg, and the haunted look that those who know combat recognize instantly. Before his deployment, James had been a star athlete in his small hometown of Riverdale, a community leader who volunteered with youth sports programs and planned to become a teacher after his service. His return from his final tour had been marked by nightmares, flashbacks, and an inability to readjust to civilian life. His marriage to his high school sweetheart collapsed under the weight of his untreated PTSD. The VA had put him on a 6-month waiting list for mental health services. Self-medicating with alcohol led to an OxyContin addiction after a training injury, and when the prescriptions ran out, he turned to street drugs. A downward spiral led to homelessness, and finally to his arrest for possession with intent to distribute, a charge stemming from his carrying drugs for a dealer in exchange for his own supply. Despite everything, James maintained a military bearing, shoulders back, responses clear and respectful when addressed directly. The "sir" and "ma'am" ingrained during his service never left him, even as the rest of his life crumbled around him. James faced a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years due to California's harsh drug laws and a prosecutor determined to make an example of him. His prior clean record in military service could be considered as mitigating factors, but Judge Robert Simmons had a reputation for strict sentencing, particularly in drug cases. The judge, a Vietnam-era veteran himself, was known for his no-nonsense approach and adherence to the letter of the law. What no one in the courtroom knew was that Judge Simmons had been fighting a private battle of his own, a growing disillusionment with mandatory sentencing laws that left no room for considering the unique circumstances of veterans suffering from service-related trauma. The case before him today represented everything that troubled him about the system he had served for 20 years. 2 months earlier, Judge Simmons had attended a judicial conference where he heard a presentation about veterans' treatment courts' specialized dockets for veterans that focused on treatment rather than punishment. The concept had originated in Buffalo, New York, and was spreading across the country. But Riverside County had resisted implementing one-siting budget constraints and tough-on-crime policies. The presentation had resonated deeply with Simmons. That night in his hotel room, he had pulled out an old photograph himself as a young Army lieutenant in Vietnam, standing with his platoon. 3 of the men in that photo had later died by suicide after returning home. Another had died homeless on the streets of San Diego. "We failed them," he had whispered to the photograph, "and we're still failing them." The next morning, he had approached the presenter, Judge Michael Sullivan, from the Buffalo Veterans Treatment Court. "How did you get started?" Simmons had asked. "The resistance must have been enormous." Sullivan had smiled grimly. "It was. But I had one case that changed everything. A Marine who was facing serious time for a nonviolent offense, clearly stemming from his combat trauma. I made a decision that day that either the system would bend or I would break it." As Simmons returned to Riverside, he made a private vow to find a way to establish a veterans treatment court in his jurisdiction. He began researching, making calls to VA officials, and quietly building support among colleagues. But he knew he needed a catalyst, a case compelling enough to overcome the institutional resistance. When James Conner's file crossed his desk, Simmons recognized it immediately as the case he had been waiting for. Judge Simmons knew he had to proceed carefully. Any appearance of bias would undermine his efforts and could lead to an appeal or even judicial sanctions. He began by scheduling a pre-trial conference requesting additional information about Conner's military service and medical history. "Your Honor, with respect, the defendant's military record is irrelevant to the charges," District Attorney Margaret Winters had argued. "The statute is clear. Possession with intent to distribute carries a mandatory minimum. His service doesn't change the law." Simmons had fixed her with a steady gaze. "Ms. Winters, this court has discretion to consider all relevant factors in sentencing. I'm simply gathering information to ensure justice is properly served." Privately, Simmons reached out to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading PTSD specialist at the local VA hospital. "I need an expert evaluation," he explained, "not to excuse criminal behavior, but to understand if it's connected to service-related trauma." He also contacted retired Marine Colonel James McKenzie, who had established a veteran mentorship program in San Diego. "I may need your help," Simmons told him, "and I may need it quickly." His most difficult conversation was with Chief Judge Howard Brennan, his superior in the court system. "Robert, what exactly are you planning?" Brennan had asked warily. "Justice, Howard, just justice. But I may need to take an unconventional approach to get there." Brennan had sighed. "Just remember, whatever you do reflects on this entire bench. Don't make me regret giving you latitude." As James Conner's case proceeded toward trial, Judge Simmons made an unusual ruling, ordering a comprehensive mental health evaluation focused on service-related conditions. The prosecution objected strenuously, but Simmons overruled them. Dr. Rodriguez's evaluation confirmed what Simmons had suspected. James suffered from severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, from an IED explosion, and had initially become addicted to opioids prescribed for combat-related injuries. "In my professional opinion," her report concluded, "Mr. Conner's criminal behavior is directly connected to his untreated combat trauma and subsequent addiction, which began with medically prescribed opioids for service-related injuries. When the report was submitted to the court, D.A. Winters was dismissive. "Your Honor, while Mr. Connor's condition is unfortunate, it doesn't change the fact that he was caught with enough heroin to trigger the mandatory minimum. The law doesn't provide exceptions for veterans." Simmons had nodded thoughtfully. "The law as written may not, Ms. Winters, but perhaps that's the problem we need to address." The prosecutor had left the courtroom visibly unsettled, sensing that the judge was considering something beyond the standard sentencing guidelines. Judge Simmons' first concrete step was to approach James's defense attorney, public defender Lisa Chin, with an unusual proposal. "I want you to file a motion challenging the constitutionality of applying mandatory minimums to veterans with service-connected disabilities," he suggested during a chambers conference. Chen looked stunned. "Your Honor, with all due respect, those motions are routinely denied. The precedent is firmly established." "File it anyway," Simmons insisted. "Make the best argument you can. Focus on the Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment angle given Mr. Connor's documented PTSD and TBI." Chen filed the motion, crafting a passionate argument about the unique circumstances of combat veterans and the failure of the criminal justice system to account for service-related trauma. As expected, D.A. Winters filed a scathing response, citing numerous precedents upholding mandatory minimums, regardless of military service. The hearing on the motion drew unexpected attention. Several veterans organizations sent representatives, and a reporter from the local paper attended, intrigued by the unusual legal argument. Simmons listened to both sides, then issued a ruling that surprised everyone. "While this court acknowledges the binding precedent regarding mandatory minimums, I find that there are substantial constitutional questions regarding their application to veterans suffering from documented service-connected disabilities. I'm taking this motion under advisement pending further proceedings." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was a signal that Judge Simmons was willing to push boundaries. The local newspaper's article about the hearing, "Judge Questions Drug Laws for Combat Veterans," caught the attention of state legislators and veterans advocacy groups. Senator Maria Vasquez herself, a Gulf War veteran, called Judge Simmons directly. "I've been trying to get a Veterans Treatment Court bill through committee for 3 years, she told him. "If you're really taking a stand on this, I want to help." Simmons was careful in his response. "Senator, I'm simply ensuring that all constitutional considerations are properly evaluated in this case, but I would welcome any legislative attention to the broader issue." Veterans began showing up at James's hearings, sitting silently in the gallery in a show of solidarity. Some wore parts of their uniforms, others simply wore caps or pins identifying their service branches. Their presence didn't go unnoticed by the local media or the prosecutor's office. D.A. Winters responded by holding a press conference, standing flanked by police officers and families affected by drug crimes. "While we respect military service, we cannot allow it to become a get-out-of-jail-free card," she declared. "Drug dealers devastate communities regardless of their background. The law must apply equally to everyone." The battle lines were being drawn with James Connor caught in the middle. A breakthrough came when Colonel Mackenzie arrived from San Diego with 3 other retired Marines, all of whom had served with James in Afghanistan. they requested a meeting with Judge Simmons and D.A. Winters. In the judge's chambers, Staff Sergeant Michael Ramirez, who had been James's squad leader, spoke passionately. "James saved my life and the lives of 4 other Marines during an ambush in Sangin. He ran through enemy fire to drag us to safety one by one. He received the Bronze Star with valor for his actions that day." He placed the citation on the judge's desk. "The James Conner I know isn't a criminal. He's a hero who's suffering and needs help, not prison." D.A. Winters remained unmoved. "His heroism is commendable, but it doesn't erase his current actions. The law is meant to serve justice, Ms. Winters," Simmons interrupted. "Not the other way around." After the meeting, Winters approached Simmons privately. "Judge, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? This feels like you're conducting your own personal crusade." Simmons met her gaze steadily. "I'm trying to ensure that a system designed to protect society doesn't destroy the very people who sacrifice to defend it. If that's a crusade, so be it." For the first time, Winters seemed to hesitate. "I have a brother who served in Iraq," she admitted. "He's struggled since coming home, but I can't just ignore the law because of personal sympathies." "I'm not asking you to ignore the law," Simmons replied. "I'm asking you to consider what justice truly requires in this case." As the case moved toward sentencing, Judge Simmons made his most audacious move yet. He ordered a special hearing to consider an alternative sentencing plan, inviting testimony from veterans treatment specialists, VA officials, and experts in therapeutic jurisprudence. D.A. Winters filed an emergency motion with the appellate court to block the hearing, arguing that Simmons was exceeding his authority by essentially creating a veterans treatment court without legislative or administrative approval. The night before the appellate ruling was expected, Simmons sat alone in his chambers, contemplating the possible end of his judicial career. If he proceeded with his plan and was overruled, he could face removal from the bench. 20 years of service ended in disgrace. He took out the old Vietnam photograph again, looking at the faces of men who had never received the help they needed. Then he looked at a newer photo on his desk, his son, a Marine lieutenant, currently serving in the Middle East. "Some risks are worth taking," he murmured to himself. The next morning, the appellate court issued its ruling while expressing serious concerns about Judge Simmons' approach. They declined to intervene before a final sentencing decision had been made. The special hearing would proceed. The day of James Conner's sentencing arrived with the courtroom packed to capacity. Veterans filled the gallery, joined by curious citizens, reporters, and even a few state legislators. D.A. Winters had brought her full team of prosecutors, clearly preparing for a legal battle. As the proceedings began, Simmons invited final statements from both sides. Winters delivered a by-the-book argument for the mandatory minimum, though her usual fire seemed somewhat diminished. When it was the defense's turn, Lisa Chen surprised everyone by yielding her time directly to James Conner himself. Hesitantly, James rose to address the court. "Your Honor, I won't stand here and say I didn't do wrong. I did. I made choices that hurt people, including myself." His voice was steady but quiet. "When I came home from Afghanistan, I couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the men I lost. I couldn't be in crowds without scanning for threats. I couldn't be the husband or friend or man I was supposed to be." He paused, swallowing hard. The pills made it quiet for a while. Then they stopped working unless I took more. Then they ran out. I'm not asking for pity or special treatment. I wish I'd found help before it came to this." As James finished speaking, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A young Marine in dress blues was being admitted by the bailiff. He walked with a pronounced limp and wore the insignia of a first lieutenant. Judge Simmons looked up, his face draining of color. "Lieutenant Simmons," he said, his judicial composure cracking slightly. "This is unexpected." The young officer approached the bench. "I apologize for interrupting these proceedings, Your Honor. I arrived from overseas last night and was informed about this case." D.A. Winters stood immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Who is this person and what relevance does he have to these proceedings?" Judge Simmons cleared his throat. "This is First Lieutenant David Simmons, my son." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the young Marine turned to face the gallery. "I served with Staff Sergeant Connor in Afghanistan in 2018. I was a brand new second lieutenant, and he was my platoon sergeant." He looked directly at James. "During a night operation in Helmand Province, our unit was ambushed. I was severely wounded, and Sergeant Connor carried me 2 miles to the extraction point under enemy fire." He gestured to his injured leg. "The doctors said I would have died from blood loss if he had waited for medevac. Every step I take today, I take because of James Connor." The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Simmons sat rigidly, his face unreadable. D.A. Winters looked genuinely shocked, clearly unaware of the connection between the judge and the defendant. "Your Honor," she said slowly, "in light of this revelation, I must request that you recuse yourself from this case immediately. This represents a clear conflict of interest." Judge Simmons sat silently for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right, Ms. Winters. I should have recused myself when I recognized Mr. Connor's name in the case file. I did not, and that was a serious lapse in judicial ethics." He stood up behind the bench. "Before I remove myself from this case, however, I believe I owe this court an explanation." The judge reached for his judicial robe and slowly removed it, revealing underneath not the expected suit and tie, but a faded army dress uniform with combat ribbons and the rank of captain. "I have worn this robe for 20 years, administering justice as I understood it, following the law as written. But beneath it, I have always remained what I was before, a soldier who served his country and saw the cost of that service firsthand." He stepped down from the bench, no longer speaking as a judge, but as a veteran. "When I returned from Vietnam in 1972, there were no welcome home parades, no support programs, no understanding of what we had experienced. My best friend from my unit died by suicide 6 months after we came home. 2 others ended up in prison. Another died homeless on the streets." He turned to face James directly. "I didn't know you had served with my son, but I recognized in you what I've seen in too many veterans, the same battles continuing long after you've left the combat zone. For years, I've sentenced men and women like you according to laws that make no allowance for the wounds you carry. I've watched the system fail you just as it failed my generation." The courtroom remained absolutely silent as Judge Simmons addressed D.A. Winters. "Ms. Winters, you are correct that I must recuse myself. I will face whatever consequences come from my failure to do so earlier. But before I go, I want to say 7 words that I should have said long before today." He turned to face the gallery full of veterans, then looked back at James Conner. "We failed you, and I am sorry." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. Veterans in the gallery stood many in tears. D.A. Winters remained at her table, visibly shaken by the unprecedented scene. Chief Judge Howard Brennan was summoned immediately and entered the courtroom looking grim. After a brief conference with all parties, he announced that Judge Simmons was temporarily relieved of his duties pending a judicial conduct review, and that James Conner's case would be reassigned to another judge. As bailiffs prepared to lead James back to holding, Lieutenant David Simmons approached D.A. Winters. "Ms. Winters, I understand you have a job to do, but I'm asking you as someone whose brother served to look beyond the letter of the law to its spirit. James Conner saved my life. He deserves the chance to save his own." Outside the courthouse, the story was already breaking across local and then national media. Veterans organizations issued statements of support for Judge Simmons. Senator Vasquez announced she would be fast-tracking her Veterans Treatment Court legislation. Social media exploded with the hashtag #WeFailedYou as veterans shared their own stories of struggling with the justice system after service. By evening, the Chief Judge's office was flooded with calls and emails. The story had touched a nerve that went far beyond a single drug case in Riverside County. In the 2 weeks following Judge Simmons' dramatic recusal, a remarkable coalition formed. Senator Vasquez convened an emergency meeting with state judicial administrators, VA officials, and veterans advocates. Colonel McKenzie mobilized his network of veteran mentors. Dr. Rodriguez prepared a comprehensive treatment proposal specifically for James Conner. Judge Simmons, facing possible removal from the bench, declined all interview requests and focused on preparing for his judicial conduct hearing. His son, Lieutenant Simmons, took emergency leave to support his father and to advocate for James. James himself remained in county jail, suddenly the center of a controversy he had never sought. When Lisa Chen visited him to explain the developments, he seemed overwhelmed. "All this for me?" he asked incredulously. "Why, it's not just for you," Chen explained. "You've become the face of something much bigger, thousands of veterans who've been failed by the system." Judge Simmons took an enormous professional risk because he believes the system needs to change. James was quiet for a moment. "If I get another chance, I won't waste it. Not after what he's sacrificing." Meanwhile, D.A. Winters found herself in an increasingly untenable position. The public sentiment had shifted dramatically against her office's hard-line stance. Her own staff was divided, with several prosecutors privately expressing support for a treatment-based approach. Most significantly, her brother, the Iraq veteran she had mentioned to Judge Simmons, called her after seeing the story on the news. "Maggie," he said, "you don't know what it's like to come home carrying the things we carry. If there's any way you can help this guy, you should, for all of us who came back different." The night before James's rescheduled sentencing hearing, now assigned to Judge Patricia Okonkwo, D.A. Winters sat alone in her office reviewing the case file. On her desk lay 2 press releases, one defending the mandatory sentence as required by law, the other announcing a rare joint motion with the defense for an alternative sentencing approach. She hadn't decided which one to use. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was her deputy, Carlos Mendez. "Still here, boss?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Just trying to figure out the right thing to do with the Connor case." Mendez nodded. "You know, my father was a Vietnam vet. Never talked about it. Drank himself to death by the time I was 15. I've always wondered if things might have been different if someone had recognized what he was going through." Winters sighed. "Carlos, we're prosecutors. Our job is to enforce the law as written." "True," he acknowledged, "but we also have discretion and a duty to seek justice, not just convictions." After he left, Winters picked up her phone and made a call she never thought she would make to Lisa Chen. "I want to discuss a possible joint recommendation to Judge Okonkwo," she said. "I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to listen to alternatives." The courthouse was even more crowded for the rescheduled sentencing hearing. News vans lined the street outside, and the gallery was filled beyond capacity. Judge Okonkwo, known for her strict adherence to procedure, had ordered extra security. James entered in his orange jumpsuit, looking nervous but more alert than in previous appearances. Lisa Chen sat beside him, unusually optimistic. D.A. Winters and her team arrived last, their expressions unreadable. Judge Okonkwo called the court to order with a stern warning. "This proceeding has already generated unprecedented publicity. I want to be absolutely clear that this court will not be influenced by public opinion or media attention. We will follow the law." She turned to the prosecution. "Ms. Winters, is the state prepared to proceed with sentencing recommendations?" Winters stood. "Yes, Your Honor. But before I do, I would like to inform the court that the prosecution and defense have been engaged in discussions regarding a potential joint recommendation." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. "This is highly unusual at this stage, Ms. Winters. The time for plea negotiations has long passed." "This is not a plea negotiation, Your Honor. The defendant's guilt has been established. This concerns an alternative sentencing approach that we believe better serves the interests of justice in this specific case." Judge Okonkwo looked skeptical, but nodded. "Proceed." Winters outlined a proposal that stunned the courtroom, a suspended sentence contingent on James's successful completion of an intensive 2-year treatment program, including inpatient PTSD treatment at the VA hospital, drug rehabilitation, regular court monitoring, and mentorship from fellow veterans. The state recognizes that while the law prescribes a mandatory minimum sentence, recent state Supreme Court rulings have acknowledged judicial discretion in extraordinary circumstances. "We believe Mr. Connor's case presents such circumstances." Judge Okonkwo frowned. "Ms. Winters, are you suggesting that this court simply ignore the mandatory minimum established by the legislature?" "No, Your Honor. We're suggesting that the court has the authority to suspend the implementation of that sentence pending successful completion of a structured treatment program. If Mr. Connor fails to meet any condition, the full sentence would be immediately imposed." The judge turned to Lisa Chen. "And the defense's position," Chen stood. "We fully support this approach, Your Honor. Mr. Connor has already been accepted into the VA's inpatient PTSD program, and Colonel McKenzie's Veteran Mentor Program has assigned 2 combat veterans to work with him daily." Judge Okonkwo remained skeptical. "While I appreciate the creativity of counsel, I'm not convinced I have the legal authority to accept this proposal." The statute is quite clear regarding mandatory minimums. The momentum seemed to be slipping away when an unexpected voice spoke up from the gallery. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" It was Judge Robert Simmons, now in a civilian suit, rather than his judicial robe or military uniform. Judge Okonkwo hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly, Judge Simmons, though I must note your unusual status in these proceedings." Simmons approached the podium. "I speak not as a judge today, but as a concerned citizen with relevant information. This morning, Governor Davis signed Executive Order 2247, creating a pilot Veterans Treatment Court program in 3 counties, including Riverside. The order specifically authorizes judges to develop alternative sentencing approaches for eligible veterans with service-connected conditions." He handed copies to the clerk, who passed them to Judge Okonkwo, the prosecution and defense. "This order was signed 2 hours ago, partly in response to this very case. It provides the legal framework Your Honor was concerned might be lacking." Judge Okonkwo called a 30-minute recess to review the executive order. When court resumed, her demeanor had subtly shifted. "Having reviewed the governor's order, I find that it does indeed provide statutory authority for an alternative approach in cases involving combat veterans with service-connected conditions. However, I remain concerned about public safety and the seriousness of the charges." She looked directly at James. "Mr. Connor, stand please." James rose, standing at attention as if before a military superior. "I need to hear from you directly. Why should this court believe that treatment rather than incarceration is appropriate in your case?" James took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I can't undo the mistakes I've made or blame them entirely on my service. What happened to me in Afghanistan broke something in me, but the choices I made afterward were still my choices." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I can tell you is that I want to be the man I was before, the Marine who served with honor, the person who helped others instead of hurting them. I've never had the right treatment for what happened over there. If given that chance, I believe I can find my way back, not just for me, but to help other vets who are struggling like I was." Judge Okonkwo considered him for a long moment. "Mr. Connor, the path being proposed is not an easy one. It may in fact be more difficult than simply serving a prison sentence. It will require absolute commitment to your recovery, complete honesty with the court, and years of intensive work. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, Your Honor, whatever it takes." The judge turned to Colonel Mackenzie in the gallery. "Colonel, your organization will be responsible for the mentorship component of this program. What makes you believe Mr. Connor can succeed?" Mackenzie stood. "Your Honor, in the Marine Corps, we have a saying, 'Leave no man behind.' James Connor lived that principle on the battlefield, risking his life repeatedly for his fellow Marines. Our program will now ensure he isn't left behind in his battle here at home. We have 2 mentors assigned to him 24/7, both combat veterans who have overcome similar challenges. We will not fail him, and we will not let him fail." Judge Okonkwo nodded slowly, then delivered her ruling. Based on the authority granted by Executive Order 2247, the unique circumstances of this case, and the comprehensive treatment plan presented, this court will suspend the implementation of the mandatory sentence pending Mr. Connor's successful completion of the Veterans Treatment Court program. She leaned forward, fixing James with an intense gaze. "Mr. Connor, make no mistake, this is not leniency. This is an opportunity to address the root causes of your criminal behavior and to make genuine amends to society. You will report to this court monthly. You will submit to random drug testing. You will participate fully in all treatment programs. Any violation will result in the immediate imposition of your full sentence." She turned to address the packed courtroom. "Let the record reflect that this case represents the first implementation of the Veterans Treatment Court approach in Riverside County. As such, it will be closely monitored not only by this court, but by judicial authorities throughout the state. Mr. Connor, you bear the responsibility not just for your own recovery, but potentially for the future of this program for other veterans." With a bang of her gavel, she concluded, "The defendant is remanded to the custody of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center for immediate commencement of inpatient treatment. This court will retain jurisdiction and conduct monthly status hearings. We are adjourned." As the courtroom erupted in emotional responses, James turned to look at Judge Simmons, who gave him a single solemn nod. It wasn't just a second chance for James, it was the beginning of a new approach to justice for veterans throughout the state. James was transported directly from the courthouse to the VA Medical Center, beginning an intensive 90-day inpatient program for PTSD and addiction. His case became the template for the newly established Veterans Treatment Court, with Judge Okonkwo appointed as its first presiding judge. D.A. Winters faced criticism from some law enforcement groups for her change in position, but she defended her decision forcefully at a press conference. Justice isn't served by applying a one-size-fits-all approach to veterans whose criminal behavior stems directly from injuries sustained in service to our country, she stated. The Veterans Treatment Court represents a more effective approach to public safety by addressing root causes rather than simply warehousing traumatized veterans in our prisons. Judge Simmons faced a judicial conduct hearing for his failure to recuse himself earlier in the case. He accepted full responsibility for his actions, offering no excuses. In a surprising decision, the Judicial Conduct Board issued only a formal reprimand, rather than removal from the bench, citing his distinguished service and commitment to improving the justice system despite this serious lapse in judgment. Within weeks, the pilot program expanded from 3 counties to 12 as judges across the state recognized the potential of the specialized court docket. Senator Vasquez's legislation, which had been stalled for years, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, providing permanent funding and structure for veterans treatment courts throughout California. 1 year later, James Connor stood before Judge Okonkwo for his final monthly review. He was unrecognizable from the gaunt, hopeless man who had first appeared in court. Clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and healthy, he reported on his continued progress. "I've been sober for 365 days today," he told the court. "I've completed the PTSD residential program and continue with weekly therapy. I'm working part-time at the VA hospital as a peer support specialist, helping other vets navigate the system. And I've been accepted to start classes at Riverside Community College next semester, working toward a degree in counseling." Judge Okonkwo smiled, a rare expression from the normally stern jurist. "Mr. Connor, your progress exemplifies exactly what this program was designed to achieve. You've not only reclaimed your own life, but are now helping others do the same. The Veterans Treatment Court expanded to handle not just drug offenses, but a range of non-violent crimes committed by veterans with service-connected conditions. The success rate measured by reduced recidivism and increased stable employment far exceeded traditional criminal justice approaches. Judge Simmons, fully reinstated to the bench, became a national advocate for veterans in the justice system, speaking at judicial conferences and helping other jurisdictions establish similar programs. His actions, while initially controversial, ultimately led to a fundamental shift in how the legal system approached veterans with service-connected conditions. D.A. Winters, surprisingly, became one of the program's strongest advocates. Her office developed specialized training for prosecutors on recognizing and appropriately handling cases involving combat trauma. Her brother, inspired by the changes she helped create, began working with veteran support organizations, finding purpose in helping others who shared his struggles. The most significant long-term impact, however, was measured in lives restored. Over the next 5 years, more than 300 veterans in Riverside County alone completed the program, avoiding incarceration and receiving the treatment they needed. The success spread across California, with thousands more veterans entering similar programs statewide. National media attention led to congressional hearings on veterans in the criminal justice system. James Conner, now 3 years sober and working full-time as a counselor while completing his degree, was invited to testify. When I came home from Afghanistan, I was fighting a different kind of war, one inside my own head, he told the committee. I lost that battle for a while and made terrible mistakes, but thanks to the Veterans Treatment Court, I found the right weapons to fight back, proper treatment accountability, and the support of fellow veterans who understood what I was going through. The hearing resulted in federal legislation providing funding for veterans treatment courts nationwide, ensuring that veterans in every state would have access to the same second chance that James had received. 5 years to the day after that fateful sentencing hearing, a special ceremony was held at the Riverside County Courthouse. The original courtroom where Judge Simmons had removed his robe was filled with graduates of the Veterans Treatment Court program, their families and supporters. James Conner, now a licensed substance abuse counselor with a master's degree in progress, stood at the podium as the keynote speaker. He had become the program's most effective advocate, his own transformation serving as powerful testimony to its potential. 5 years ago, in this very room, I was a broken man facing a decade in prison, he began. Today, I stand before you, not just free, but whole. The scars of war will always be with me, but they no longer define or control me. He gestured to the filled gallery. Look around this room. Every veteran here has a similar story. We all came home carrying burdens invisible to most civilians. Some of us collapsed under that weight and made choices we deeply regret. But thanks to this program, we found our way back to the people we were meant to be, not despite our service, but because of the strength and discipline it instilled in us. In the front row sat Judge Robert Simmons, now retired from the bench, but still active in veterans advocacy. Beside him was his son David, now a captain, and recently returned from his 3rd deployment. D.A. Margaret Winters sat nearby, having become an unexpected ally in the program's development. At the conclusion of his speech, James called Judge Simmons to the podium and presented him with a shadow box containing an American flag that had flown over their base in Afghanistan. Judge, 5 years ago, you said 7 words that changed everything. We failed you, and I am sorry. Today, on behalf of every veteran whose life has been transformed by the program you helped create, I want to say 7 words back to you. You did not fail us after all. The courtroom rose in a standing ovation as the two men embraced no longer judge and defendant, but fellow veterans who had found a way to heal not just themselves, but an entire system. Outside the courthouse, a new plaque had been installed commemorating the establishment of California's first Veterans Treatment Court. Below the official language and dates was a simple quote, "Justice is not merely the application of law, but the recognition of humanity in those who stand before it." The words were attributed to Judge Robert Simmons from the day he removed his robe and revealed the uniform beneath, the day a single act of courage began a movement that would ultimately redeem thousands of America's warriors who had lost their way after coming home. As the ceremony concluded and the attendees filed out into the bright California sunshine, James paused on the courthouse steps. 5 years earlier, he had been led from this building in handcuffs, heading toward what seemed like the end of his life. Now, he walked down those same steps, a free man in every sense, free from addiction, free from the crushing weight of untreated trauma, and free to help others find the same path to recovery. A young veteran approached him, newly admitted to the program and still uncertain about his future. "Do you really think this can work for someone like me?" he asked hesitantly. James smiled and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "It worked for me when nothing else did. And the person I was 5 years ago was in a much darker place than you are now." He pointed back at the courthouse. "In there, you'll find something most of us lost when we came home from war, a mission. Your mission now is to heal, to make amends, and to become the person you were meant to be before trauma and addiction took over. It won't be easy. In some ways, it's harder than what we faced in combat. But you won't be fighting alone this time." As they walked together toward the VA center across the street, James reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. A single act of courage, not his own, but that of a judge willing to risk everything to do what was right, had created ripples that continued to spread, changing lives and systems that had seemed immovable. Sometimes he realized justice wears unexpected faces. Sometimes it requires removing the robes of authority to reveal the humanity beneath. And sometimes the most powerful words in any courtroom aren't found in law books or statutes, but in the simple human acknowledgement of failure and the commitment to do better. 7 words had changed everything. "We failed you, and I am sorry." And 7 words had completed the circle. "You did not fail us after all."